Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a great session ahead of us entitled Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning. We're going to talk about IP implications now and into the future. I've got a great panel here with me today, and we're going to do a few introductions, starting with myself. I'm Justin Pierce from the law firm of Venable. I am the chair of the National Bar Association IP section, also the head of IP at the Venable Law Firm. Our panelists today are a distinguished panel, and I'll run through the names for a quick introduction and give them a chance as well to introduce themselves briefly. But first, we have Charlie Bingham from Microsoft Corporation. We have Sean Damon from the Finnegan Law Firm, and Cassie Athaniel from Microsoft Corporation as well. All of these folks work extensively in the area of artificial intelligence. All of them have careers that touch on different aspects of intellectual property and the law, and each has a career or point of their profession that has something to do in terms of its impact with artificial intelligence. And with that intro, and before we get into sort of defining what is artificial intelligence in the presentation, I'd like to just start with a couple of our panelists to ask from their perspective if they'd be willing to share a bit with us as to how artificial intelligence and machine learning impacts or affects what they do at work. And we'll start with Cassie here.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I support the U.S. financial services industry, and so I support all of the big and small financial service institutions. And, of course, they have embraced AI in certain ways. They've been using the technology for a while now. And what we look at it, and from my position, what I hope to do and what our company looks to do is to democratize it so that you don't only use our technology, but companies and organizations can use the technology. And it's not in this self-contained box that you need to come to us, but companies all around the world, it's pervasive, and companies all around the world have enough data on their own that they can then, we provide the platform that's trustworthy and one that you are assured that is going to be operating the way it should run, and then you can develop your own technologies on top of it. And so I support the customers in their goal to become digitally transformed. And so that's how it touches me on the day-to-day.
All right, thank you. And Sean?
So I'm an associate at Finnegan, and so I spend most of my time counseling clients in patent portfolio management with respect to artificial intelligence, as well as navigating the intersection between artificial intelligence and open source. So often we touch on how to monetize and or protect your patent portfolio by interfacing in the space of artificial intelligence, and then also participating in various organizations that utilize open source licenses.
Okay. And so as we get into what is AI, we'll move to Charlie to help us get off to a good start with the definition around that.
All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Charlie Bingham. I am an attorney at Microsoft, and I support our U.S. public sector team that sells to the state and local government and educational sector. Starting with what is artificial intelligence, at Microsoft, we believe that AI offers incredible opportunities to drive widespread economic and societal progress, but to make AI be as beneficial as possible, its capabilities need to be available widely, and that's why you see in this slide the future computed. We tackled this issue and addressed some of the concerns in the development of AI that Cassie will get to later, but when made accessible to everyone, AI is going to transform industries and make us all more productive and basically help us solve society's biggest challenges. There's been research on the economic impact of AI in global GDP, and AI is perceived as a great transformer for both developing and developed economies, and it has the potential to double annual economic growth in 2035. What is AI? When you hear AI, if you could go back a slide, we're on the slide 4, While the definitions will vary, I like to think of it as essentially the science of making things smart. When you hear AI, just think of innovations that can extend you or your organization's capabilities. Moving on to the next slide about what is artificial intelligence. Computers understanding the world. Computers are learning the way people do through experience, and for computers, experience is captured in the form of data. It's the learning component that makes AI different from historical approaches to building machines or programming software. AI is not explicitly programmed to respond a certain way. It basically learns to respond that way based on the data that it receives. And at Microsoft, we're pushing the boundaries to help AI interact with systems more naturally through, vision, the ability to recognize a picture or a video, speech, the ability to listen and transcribe words in a text, language, the ability to comprehend a variety of languages, evaluate sentiment, and learn how to recognize what it is exactly that users want. And then finally, knowledge, the ability to detect and draw inferences on how disparate information are related to each other. For example, in predicting how bad traffic will be, computers kind of draw upon cell phone data and other historical traffic flows based on the time of day, kind of the season, the weather, and major events in the area. So that's how AI is helping computers to understand the world. And you can go to the next slide. While we're talking about AI, we want to get through this quickly, but what we found is different audiences have different levels of understanding of AI, and these are some of the key terms. I like to think we don't make it to the usefulness of AI without these key components, and we're going to quickly discuss those just to level set as we go forward. You can go to the next slide. Now, I like this picture, and I've been using it for a while in presentations because it clearly illustrates how some people used to think about the cloud when I would enter negotiations. I think today we're a bit more advanced, but there's still some that don't fully grasp the concept. And so when you hear the cloud, just think of a fancy way of saying stuff that's not on your computer or on your cell phone. So this is a good another infographic because it basically shows you that big data comes from everywhere. When you think about it and you add in what Microsoft likes to call the intelligent edge, or the devices and appliances connected to the cloud through the Internet of Things, you realize that big data can come from everywhere. Sensors used to gather information, post to social media sites, digital documents. A good example, and we'll be using this example throughout, is if you have a newer model car, it's producing a lot of data. You think about your parking assist, your blind side sensors, your navigation system, your maintenance sensors, which would include like your check oil light, your gas mileage sensor, and even the Bluetooth sync with your phone all provide you as the user of that vehicle and the technology valuable data. And a key impact, I won't read all of these, you can kind of read it as I go through it and summarize it, is a key impact of the big data is the ability to gain critical and timely insights that essentially allow you to change your behavior for the good. Again, using the car example, when you're backing up and you could be not paying attention to your monitor or on your cell phone, the buzz alert or vibration of the steering wheel when you're about to back into something helps you to change your behavior and your decision not to pay attention to what you're doing in a timely manner that allows you to avoid a costly accident. Another example would be, say, for your lights coming on automatically, or your windshield wipers starting to wipe when you can't seem to find the button and it starts to rain. All of this can be, those are personal uses, but when you think about organizations, they find the same value in big data. the next key term, machine learning, is basically the science of getting computers to learn and act like humans do, and then improve their learning over time in an autonomous fashion by feeding them data and information in the form of observations and real-world interactions. With machine learning, computers learn basically how they learn without being explicitly programmed, which is a change from someone having to actually code information in. Cognitive services. One of the reasons this is so important is it basically humanizes the interaction we have with technology. Think about, on social media when you see someone who's asked Siri a question and Siri has told them a joke. This interaction no longer needs to be through a keyboard and mouse. Originally, when Microsoft first started, and some of Apple as well, the only way you had to interact with computers was with a mouse. Think of how now we interact with our cell phones. I'm sure with a lot of attorneys on the phone, you remember the BlackBerry, and perhaps some of you still have a BlackBerry. We've come a mighty long way to the fact that now we even have facial recognition capabilities to unlock our phones. So that's an application of cognitive services. And then examples of AI services. Many of you may have these apps on your phone. You have vision apps, language apps, speech and knowledge apps. And I think some of those are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go through the capabilities of what they all do. But they all use AI in some way to help you achieve something. And we kind of talked about this, some of the examples of AI evolution. Sean, feel free to jump in here.
Right.
I've kind of mentioned some of the stuff, but go ahead.
Definitely. So let me ask the question here as we turn to the evolution. Sean, if you could just speak to us a bit about artificial intelligence evolution and cover in that in terms of just, why should we, as attorneys care about these technologies as well?
Certainly. So on this slide, what we have here is looking at different levels of technology, right? And so while cruise control was invented prior to artificial intelligence, that was kind of a first concept of what the capabilities would allow. I'm sure everyone remembers when you're in your car, you could set the speed to do 55, and that's all it did. It did 55 miles per hour. It didn't matter if you were coming on a curve or if a car was in front of you, or what the situation was, what the speed limit was. You told it to do 55, it did 55. So we've kind of evolved from that primitive concept of speed control to moving over to level B, where now our phones have GPS capabilities and can give us directions. And so as Charlie discussed, with the evolution of big data and collecting the sensors and the information from that, we're now able to tie in the GPS data of our phones with the cruise control feature, and now we have these advanced driver assist systems, right, where we're not only using blind spot detection and adaptive cruise control, where your car will automatically slow up, it will brake, you can tell it to keep 1 car or 2 cars distance. The cars are now reading the traffic signs using cameras and also your phone data to figure out, well, wait, this is not the speed limit. Let me, the car, adjust the speed limit to what it should be. And so this is kind of cognizant of the evolution of where AI is taking us. And then now you're seeing more and more companies that are testing autonomous vehicles, driverless cars. And they have these nice cameras and radar sensors and things of that nature on them. And they're constantly learning, and they're realizing patterns and what's the proper way to go. And so we see AI not being something that is just a fad and here today. We're really seeing the evolution of AI as we're getting more and more information, more and more data, and communicating more and more.
Excellent. We're now going to move into artificial intelligence in the law, because I think this does impact a lot of what all of us do in this room and a lot of what the audience does who's listening in. And just with some of our presenters here, I'd love to hear your takes on how AI and the law will interact and impact us in the near future.
So I'll start off. Artificial intelligence, a lot of lawyers think that this is just for text, right? Because you think of artificial intelligence and that's some geek behind a computer just programming. And that's the visual image that people have of artificial intelligence. But I'm here to tell you that artificial intelligence impacts all areas of the law and not just technology. And as Charlie mentioned, the importance of it in terms from a business perspective, there was a recent study in Fast Company Design magazine that said as of today, it's a $15 billion industry. But by 2020, it'll be a $70 billion industry. And that's because it impacts all areas of the law. And if we move to slide 16, we can kind of see key issues that arise in various areas of the law and how AI impacts it. And so, not to read each of these, but just to talk on some of them, from an IP perspective, patents for AI are getting created daily. Well, the question becomes, if the artificial intelligent robot creates something, who owns the patent? If a robot that's been programmed with artificial intelligence infringes on someone's patent, is it the robot the infringer, the company that owns it? From a tort perspective, when an autonomous vehicle has an accident, who's liable? From a privacy perspective, there's already artificial intelligence software that's doing discovery. And so now it has access to your data records, your health records, and things of that nature. And so what are the privacy concerns of robots and algorithms learning and collecting this data? There's contract reviews going on. And some people probably have seen from different shows, but it's in the real world. Judges are actually using artificial intelligence to decide sentencing. And Cassia will talk about this later from an implicit bias concern, but there's been studies showing where two people commit the same crime but live in different areas, they're getting different sentences. And so we need to understand why that is and how we can address that.
So one thing is, I hear the discussion here, and we talk about where AI is going. A lot of us, particularly in the IP area, know patents, and looking at patents over time, Sean, is a way to detect that. I think this slide really speaks about whether it's a fad or whether it's something, here to stay long into the future.
Certainly. And so, as I said, the term artificial intelligence was coined back into the 1950s. So we've already shown that it's sustained time. It's not just a fad. But then if we take a look at this chart right here on slide 17, you can clearly see in the past 20 years the growth of the number of patent applications being filed. And generally speaking, where technology is seeing a growth in the number of patents generally shows where the industry is going.
Another tool for that is keyword clustering, and I thought this was very informative in terms of just a visual. You mentioned about some of the searches to look at text in patents. What are the team's thoughts on this?
So as Charlie mentioned, he gave you some of the key terms and backdrops for how artificial intelligence is and defined that. So as we look at some of the key terms in terms of what's being patented, you can see it can touch all aspects of your life. It's not just programming or robots, right? It's neural networks, speech recognition. If you see the new game show with Jamie Foxx where can you beat Shazam, right? That's artificial intelligence doing speech recognition. You pull up Shazam and ask it what song is playing. It's doing it in real time. It's not like someone submitted lyrics into a database and they're just matching lyrics. You have image processing. With the release of the new iPhones, for example, it's showing how you can use software to manipulate the image, and voice recognition. So it truly is an area where you can see constant growth, and it's been around for a while, and the key terms really do set out that is touching all aspects of users' life.
So you kind of referenced in your discussion there about what could be patented, and this seems to have some examples of that.
So what we're seeing in terms of patenting, because in the backdrop, we always have concerns for is it new, is it obvious, and especially with one-on-one jurisprudence being what it is today and not being as clear. there are always concerns about what can be patented. So in the AI context, we always want to think about what pieces matter and are patentable. So you have the system architecture. You can think of that as your neural networks and expert knowledge. Data processing systems, solving problems, reasoning, discovery. Learning and training, autonomous vehicles, learning how to adapt to roads. And then AI embodies apparatus and methods. So again, smart homes, IoT devices. I'm sure everyone's house has been rated by BG&E or whoever your electric company is, and they want you to upgrade to the smart thermostat or Ecobee or Nest. And we're seeing the proliferation of IoT devices, which is giving way to this big data that Charlie spoke about. And by having that amount of data and having those sensors, it's further enabling the artificial intelligence. So the more and more the data grows, the more and more the AI networks grow. And so if we move down a slide, this just gives a good example. Pick the Microsoft one, even before I knew who I was on the panel with, so no bias there. But we can look at, this is descriptive pertaining of deep neural networks. And so if we move down one slide, 21, we can look at here, we're talking about a system for training. And so there's a hidden layer and initially generate. So from a patent prosecution perspective, we have to think about how to broadly capture what the invention is, but then also define it and make sure we have all the different types of systems covered. So whether that's method claims, system claims, and find ways of capturing the algorithmic pieces, but in a way that's patentable.
I think this brings up some key questions when people think about how artificial intelligence and the law works, certainly on the intellectual property side, when you try to think about who's the actual inventor. At some point, I think the questions will be whether it's the human or the machine or software, who owns it. In this world of increased hurdles under Section 101, is it patent eligible? Is it new and non-obvious, or is it someone applying AI to something that was already in existence and being done? And then even trying to figure out who infringes.
Right, and so the next set of slides just really walks through some hypotheticals and key points to think about comparing the law and the technology for you to take in. We won't walk through each of these examples in the interest of time, but we did want to include this information for in case there are questions or thoughts that you want to have as you're going through this presentation.
Great, it's a great point. And for the sake of the audience, because some of the next upcoming slides are patent heavy, these are things that we've put in to make sure that you've got the right kind of depth that you would want to answer these questions, but we're not going to linger on these too long in order to keep this moving, and then give people a chance to ask questions about the material and the content. If you would, maybe a word on what's patent eligible.
Right, so we talked about in this day and age of Section 101 and post-Alice world and trying to clarify what's patent eligible. So we know you cannot patent out organizing human activity and these abstract ideas. And so part of what artificial intelligence is learning. And so if you are creating an algorithm that then will adapt and move forward, the question is, how do we articulate that in a way that passes muster in terms of 101, but then also is not so limiting that as the embodiment of the artificial intelligence grows and learns and starts developing further down the line, you pass this question of what's patent eligible. And so the key issue here is really, is the goal of the artificial intelligence simply to replicate human activity? Is it claimed in an abstract way? And we have to think about ways of avoiding the 101 rejection.
Thank you. How would you apply the age-old question of whether it's new and non-obvious to artificial intelligence inventions?
Certainly. So from considering new and non-obviousness, I mean, obviously, the way that you are drafting your claims, you have to have some backdrop knowledge of what has already been done before. And you want to, and strategically speaking, you want to consider your claims such that you're not just applying it now to a robot or to the artificial intelligence embodiment or building block. The key takeaway is that you really have to examine and know what the state of the art is, and in some cases, although not always recommended, perform a search so that you know what the field is and how you're operating it. And then, I mean, always the goal is to stay current. If you understand the market, then you'll understand how to position and draft your applications, and understanding your clients' needs and goals to get to that end goal of having a patent on that technology.
Great. One of the questions relates to sort of who infringes, and I could think an intriguing question when you talk about some of the questions that are out there in the artificial intelligence context could be, you know, what happens in the hypothetical where you might have something produced, an item, or some invention created by a robot or an artificial intelligence. You know, who's liable for the infringement at that point?
So we've posed a set of hypotheticals that kind of talk to that point, and I think so as the law plays out, we will see, because it will depend on varying different factors. You know, for example, if you created a robot and the robot then itself learned and created a new product, then is that new product infringed, and who's liable? Is that the company who owns the robot? Because you could obviously see a situation where company A develops the robot but then sells it. So now it's no longer the owner, but they wrote the algorithm that ultimately led to what is infringing. So at the backdrop of that, you have to consider joint infringement. And so that may be where you have method claims, and it may be that both the company that created the algorithm infringes, but then also the company that has ownership of the robot and then subsequently gave it the inputs to create the infringing product. Some other interesting joint infringement in terms of systems and apparatus. So, you know, the key takeaway here is that not owning or directly controlling the AI may not be sufficient enough to avoid infringement. So even if you create a back end to a system, that ultimately may not insulate you from infringement theory.
Okay. Thank you. So as we move from patent-specific analysis here, I'd like to go back to a topic that was raised early on as we transition over here to Cassia and talk about artificial intelligence and its impact in the legal industry. And Charlie.
I think it's Charlie that's going to.
That's right.
Here. Yeah.
So,
great.
Can you hear me? Being a public sector attorney, and my ultimate customers, or my sales group's ultimate customers being government entities, the way we use AI is we're seeing trends of smart cities, like connected corridors, smart parking lots, and other applications of AIs that assist these government entities in the efficient delivery of their services to their government constituents. So that's how I see AI in my daily job workplace. When you talk about AI in the legal industry, there's been a lot of recent media attention given to AI lately, and this slide, you can go back up to the previous slide, it provides a few examples of some of the key headliners. On a practical level, lawyers should be aware that AI already carries out legal tasks, and within a few years, I think it's safe to say that AI will be taking over, or at least affecting a significant amount of the work now done by lawyers. And you balance that with the concern that's ever present that robots will take our jobs away. I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon, but as lawyers, AI, if we do use it, it will allow us to stop doing some of the repetitive routine and mundane tasks that we do on a daily basis. It can help us focus on more impactful work, and it can help us to deliver our legal solutions in a much faster and cheaper way. So that's just an overview of of AI in the legal industry. Essentially, it's going to help us work smarter, not harder. You can advance to the next slide. And it's going to give us an opportunity to do a lot of things. The old mentality was that you had to do it yourself. And now we have, as you can see in this picture, Cortana, who's able to do a lot of things for you. And that kind of is a great segue into the first area in way that AI is being used in the legal industry is chatbots. Some people call them chatbots. Some people call them digital assistants. They're all around us nowadays. If you have ever tried to do some online shopping for shoes or something like that, they even have commercial purposes. A key use case is basically leveraging a chatbot to do work for lawyers, like set up calls, set up travel, keep your calendar current, or track hours, or simply to follow up with people and give you reminders. They're essentially our digital concierge service that helps us to deliver whatever our legal services are to our customers. At Microsoft, we as attorneys that support our field sellers, Cassie and I, sometimes we have what we call a chat bot that allows us to kind of point our clients in the right directions. They typically come to us when they don't know something. It's always just try legal first, NDAs and repetitive questions, and the chatbot allows them to type in whatever it is, the solution that they're looking for, and it can point them in the right direction, sometimes by just providing them a link where they should go to find the legal services that they're looking for. If you go to the next slide, another AI use application is conducting legal research. And if you look at the legal profession, there may still be partners at your firm that remember the time when you were looking for case law. You had to go to the library and look through a bunch of books and stacks. Now we can use Westlaw and Nexus. So that's just another way that AI is assisting the legal industry to be more efficient. When you're looking for that needle in the haystack or that one exception, Westlaw and LexisNexis can help you get there much quicker than you can actually reading through a bunch of cases. And AI is only making legal research better. Same thing with due diligence and eDiscovery. If you spend any time at a firm, whether on the transactional side or the litigation side, you've probably come in contact with AI applications, whether you knew it or not. And AI is helping the legal industry to be more efficient because there's no need to have a tired group of kind of highly paid young associates that may have different motivations to do that type of work. Especially in the eDiscovery phase, we see it used to be boxes and boxes of documents, and now you can use an application to search for that smoking gun that you're looking for based on key terms. Contract review. The day has arrived, and I am so happy, where you have sophisticated AI tools that can conduct a comprehensive review of a customer's comments of your standard agreements, and it can provide you with an analysis of what you should or shouldn't agree to based on previous deals and fallback terms which have been fed into the system. And it can also provide you with talking points to defend your position if that information has been set up. And again, that's AI being based off of big data. So once you've fed in your key terms and the standard fallbacks which you've given previously, it helps you to be more efficient moving forward. And this is going to help transactional lawyers practice law at a high level and allow them to get out of some of the grunt work and spend time focusing on the customer and the negotiations and kind of using their emotional intelligence to get the deals done. Another area, taxes. You think of, I think it's Quick Turbo and some of the other software products that you have out there that allow you to file your taxes based on your answers to certain key questions. So those are just a few examples of how AI is being used in the legal industry, and I'm sure there'll be more innovative applications as we continue to develop the use cases for it.
Thank you, Charlie. So now in our next section, we want to move into, as we've talked artificial intelligence and the law, thinking about how artificial intelligence will impact some of the principles and policies and laws and regulations that would be responsible for AI and how we interact with AI and how AI would interact with us as humans. So we'll turn to Cassie out here.
Sure. And so if we think about it, there's so many wonderful things that AI does, and the cloud gave us the ability to answer some of the world's pressing, all the world's most pressing questions. That the data itself, when you ask the right questions with the amount of data that companies are holding all over the world, and again, the cloud gives us the ability to do that, then you're able to solve so many problems. So it's so much good there. But then you want to, so when you think about the fact that now we can identify a child that's missing, right? Or if there's a natural disaster and you can reconnect families, you want the AI to work in that manner to allow for that type of solution. However, are you okay with facial recognition when you're trying to protest a government? Is that a good use of facial recognition or other AI types of technologies? So Microsoft realized with all the data that we're all receiving from different pulse points, that there needs to be some ethical principles around how data and how AI is developed, how it's rolled out, and then how it's monitored. And there need to be some principles of how it's developed. And it's really still in a nascent stage, because we're talking about what we do now will impact how it will roll out later and what it becomes. Because if you just create it and then you put the baby, the baby is being born, but once the baby's here, and if you put it in the closet and you don't continue to monitor and train it and make sure it's doing what it was intended to do, then you don't know what consequences will come from having not nurtured that baby all along. So that's where we are right now. And with, this raises a lot of concerns, and it's a heightened responsibility for techs and governments and civil society and the civil organizations around the world. And so our principles, we believe, and they're here, so you see them. We think things should be fair. We know that if you don't trust it, and that's with the cloud, too. If you don't trust it, you're not as comfortable with using it. You don't think that it benefits us all. And so there are a number of biases that come with AI, and there are ways that organizations and cloud companies like, Microsoft, companies like Microsoft are trying to help mitigate it, because you cannot remove bias. But what you can do is check your blind spots, mitigate it by the way that you hire, the way that you train it, the type of diversity you have in the development in it, so you get different perspectives. And so when there's fairness, when you believe that there's fairness, are you developing something that's fair? When we talk about a driverless car, will it notice a black person? Because we know there's some AI that will not detect you if you're black. That's a problem. If you're driving, you have a driverless car, and it won't see me coming, I'm not comfortable with that. So we have to think about things that we're going to do to make sure it's fair, reliable, and safe. You think about in the healthcare and financial services, you want to make sure that you're creating AI that people can expect to run safely, it's reliable, and even in unexpected circumstances, you've already thought of those things. So you want to make sure in fields where transportation, again, healthcare, financial services, that if it's not reliable, if it's not done in a safe and reliable way, that it can have harmful and detrimental consequences. And so you want to make sure that you've created the data, the AI, so it's be able to be that is able to behave in a way that is prepared for the different types of circumstances that come about. And with AI, at some point, it starts learning from itself. So you have to make sure that the data going in, bad data in, bad data out. So you want to make sure that, you have the right type of, you created data that the training data itself is not skewed and not biased. And so that's where fairness and reliability come into play. Privacy and security, again. Data is the impetus for AI being as massive and as pervasive across the world as it is because of data. And so we need to keep your data private. We need to make sure we have the right tools and mechanisms in place so that we're protecting your data, because that will impact your ability, again, to trust the AI and trust the solutions. And we don't want it to get in the hands of people who want to do the wrong thing and wanted, to do nefarious types of acts. And so we want to make sure that that third principle is met. Then inclusive. We want it to be used by everyone, not for those who look a certain way or talk a certain way, but even if you have any type of disabilities, that you're able to use it. If you are from a certain background or a certain ethnicity, you're able to use it. So it's important that the AI is developed in a way that it is beneficial to all. And I'll even use the example of Tay. That was one of our first experiences in Microsoft. We put this robot out, and we thought it was going to do beautiful things, and within 24 hours, it became racist and misogynistic because of the bias that interaction with people. And what people did was said things to it that it just started repeating back and saying offensive things back. So that's one of the learnings that Microsoft got early on, you can't just put something out there. You have to make sure you have a number of controls in place, because when you don't, then you're not including people. You becoming, you're being offensive and misogynistic and racist, then there's not that inclusive element. And so it's important that we look at these principles, and underlying them all four are transparency. Not that we need to show you our code and our data and, show you those things, but how did we get to this solution? How did we come up with this algorithm? What is it intended to solve? Is it doing that? So transparency and what we do, and then accountability accountability to people who are using it, to the company, and to governments, that we're showing accountability to those who will be using the AI, and having committees. And we have an ether, and it's called AI and Ethics and Research and what's the last letter? Research and something. Anyway, it's called Ether, but it's a committee that is developed to do all of these things. They're analyzing any projects that are developed, making sure we have certain checkpoints across each product, across, the company, that they're looking at it on a very thoughtful basis, and just understanding, as we're asking certain questions, that we also realize we don't have all the answers. We are still in the fact-finding stage. Most people are, most companies are, because there's just so much we don't know. It's still pretty new as it relates to the pervasiveness on how this is impacting every person in the world. It's not just by industry. It's not based on where you are geographically. It's going to impact us all. So there are a number of questions, and to answer, engineering and research. Thank you, Sean. Ether, thank you. Engineering and research. So our Ether committee is AI and Ethics and Engineering and Research. So that's what it stands for. So we have that committee and a board that's virtual, and there are a number of subcommittees, and that's what they're tasked at doing, making sure that we're meeting our principles across the board. And we don't think it stops there, though, because when you look at bias, and I talked about, this a little bit, but can computers be racist? Can they be? Well, when you think about the lack of, there's a lack of diversity, again, in the hiring, in the training, and then in the retraining. And if you're not doing these things, and humans, and what algorithms do, they reflect the biases and the perspectives of people and the people who are actually doing the coding and the training of the data that was originally used. And if you think about, I think, Sean, you were talking about, there's a app that they were using in U.S. court, and let me make sure I don't, and they were using it to determine what the punishment should be and who the likelihood of doing, a recurring offense, another offense. And black folks had a higher number of cases where we were believed to have there'd be an expectation that we would have it would recur again, and it was off. It wasn't correct. It wasn't an accurate assessment. But then they're using this data, and then you think about also part of the concern was not only are you using this data, you're also using data from arrests in neighborhoods where you're over policing those neighborhoods. So when you're saying that the likelihood is that they're going to be a repeatable offense, the data was skewed because you were using bad data from the beginning. So, bad data in, bad data out. And I kind of talked about the importance about all the, we're looking at them now, but so we can kind of move through them because we know. But again, when we talk about the fairness thing, so far right now, and not only Microsoft, but a number of, companies just like us are still having a tough time with getting it right. When we're looking at the lighter the skin, white men have it great. The darker your skin gets, the harder it is for them to accurately recognize people of color. And so that can be a problem when you start thinking about the number of ways that you're denied services or you're impacted in your safety, that this is something that we all have to solve. Oh, yeah, should I use that one? Okay. Sure. There was this, it might have been a TED Talk, but there was about the water, this woman went into the bathroom, and each time she tried to use the water faucet, the water wouldn't turn on because it didn't recognize the color of her skin. So when she used the white hand, and this has happened to me, I've tested it out now. When I put my palms up, the water comes on. If I turn my hands and use the back side, the top of my hands, the water doesn't come on. And that's not by coincidence. That is in some instances because it has not been tested, using and trained, using anything other than skin that looks like the person who's developing the AI. So, these are real things that we may not even realize, when you're actually using it, but that might be the reason why the water isn't coming on when you go into the bathroom sometimes. And so we talked about these, again, you're making sure that it's reliable and safe. Testing has to be ongoing. Monitoring has to be ongoing. And again, as I described, that you need to design it to expect unexpected circumstances. And when you have a diverse talent pool, that really does help when you come up with the perspectives on the way people think about the world and how they think about and the experiences they've had. And so it's really important that you have a diverse pool to help with that as well. And we talked about reliability and safety. Now, this one, I didn't know if you wanted me to talk about this, or is this something you wanted to talk about?
Sure. I mean, we can. So on this side, we're just thinking about, and everyone may have an opinion on this, how, one, governments affect the impact of AI and its growth. At one time in 2012, only 6 states had introduced legislation with respect to autonomous vehicles. And so you can see, in 2012, that wasn't that long ago, right? And there was only 6 states. By 2017, 33 states have introduced legislation because, everyone wants to get that business there and get the money from it. But how do you safely do that given your constituents and people who occupy the roads, bikers, and other aspects of that? So it's just one more way where we're talking about the impact of AI, right? So it's not just from a tech perspective with respect to the autonomous vehicle and how AI is creating autonomous vehicles, but it's also creating laws, right? Because we have to have laws that are now impacted and on the books in view of the AI technology that is out there. And so this is just one more data point showing the growth in AI.
Okay. And it's funny we're talking about legislation because that's another thing that we believe is not just the tech responsibility tech companies, but it's the government. There need to be some norms. And I was on a panel last week talking to someone from an AI. He owned an AI company, and he said, usually we want innovation. We don't want the government to bother. We actually agree. This is a place where it's such a sensitive, and if you get it wrong, and are we going to rely on people to just be ethical at all times, or do we need some type of norm and some principles and some laws in place to help make sure that as it's developed, we're using ethical principles behind it? So we do believe that then, that this is an area where the government should have a role, and along with academia and technology companies. And so we feel strongly that there should be a role of the government across the world. And then a lot of governments are creating principles. So that's something I think that the attorneys on the line should know and make sure their clients are aware. There are principles being created around the world. There's ISO standard that's in the works right now. There's they're FinServ, in some places in the world. I think it's Singapore I was just hearing about today. And they're talking about their principles that they're putting in place for FinServ. And so be aware that while we have our own set of principles, and we don't think they're the only 6, in the world, there are others that just keep in mind that a lot of companies are in agreement and governments that there needs to be some protections on how data is, and how AI is further developed and the responsibilities that we all should have. So.
Right, given how powerful AI is as a tool,
yeah,
and based on what you just talked about with both companies right now for different reasons with respect to the products and services they offer, but then on the other hand, governments trying to come up with legislation around it, it really does highlight the fact that it's very powerful when it's used or optimized in a particular tool. So I'd be curious just to hear from you, what are your thoughts in terms of the right way to go on policies for privacy and security?
So it's funny you say that, because when we talk about privacy and security, do you mean around how we as a tech company protect the data?
Right.
Is that what you're...
Right, and what maybe a company should be expecting the government to do in that area too.
Well, we already know that GDPR is one area where they've already, and that's just the EU. I think most countries, there's going to be regional or whatever, there are going to be countries that are also going to apply. California, we just talked, California has their own, so there are laws now being put in place, and GDPR even addresses, I think, how you get to, there's a part of their regulation that you do have to, well, I think, and you can help me with this, Sean, but a part of the GDPR does require that you can explain how you derive, particularly if it's a decision that's being made and a data subject wants to know how did you arrive there, you have to be able to answer that.
Yeah.
And so there are laws, that, and the one in Singapore has that also, that mechanism I think they're developing as well. And so there are laws that are being created to ensure that companies are doing right by customers, because there's a fundamental right to your privacy. And when we talk about data in the AI space, and that's all it really is about, is your data, that there needs to be some robust, obligations and stringent rules around how that's used, and you don't want people to abuse that. It's in the wrong hands. And as a tech company, we want you to trust us, so we support that. We support that there needs to be some policies and regulations in place, and when they come out, we comply. That's our objective.
Right, and so the privacy and security thing raises several interesting questions, right? Because on the one hand, you have privacy and security in terms of protecting the data,
yes,
but then also you have privacy and security aspects from the AI having knowledge of the data and then utilizing it to create new data. And so you have, on the one hand, you want to protect your identity, but then you also want to be safe.
Sure.
And so it's always an interesting area. And I think from what Cassia and Charlie have said, the key takeaway here is really that you can no longer just be a lawyer with AI in one field, because it will touch everything.
Absolutely.
So even if you're an IP lawyer, you still have to consider security.
That's right. And
whether that's cybersecurity or protecting health data or anything, and brands, trademarks, copyright, contracts. You can navigate these different contractual issues, settlement agreements, right? So this AI and the
Right.
principles and you have to be well versed regardless of what area you're practicing.
Oh, that's true. I mean, it doesn't matter what business you're in. You have to understand. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And Peter, I would just add that at some point we're going to have to rethink how to commercially exploit data. We see this with some of the large social media companies, Facebook and Google. Companies have figured it out, but we're going to have to find a way to commercially exploit it in a way that kind of promotes not only individual privacy, but choice and control, coupled with security and protection. And I don't know if it'll be a self-regulatory model for the tech industry or how they're going to figure it out, but where oil used to be the new king, now it's data. And we see that because some of the largest capital marketization companies are only providing services based on data. You look at Google, you look at Facebook. The data that we give to these services are very valuable, and so this kind of couples with what Cass has talked about, but how do we move forward to make sure that all groups of people benefit from their data? Because some people's data is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's more valuable than others' data. You think of Instagram, what are they called? Social influencers. The data that they're putting up is probably more valuable than normal data, and to some extent they've learned how to capitalize off of it. But those are some of the considerations, along with what Cass mentioned, that we have to think about moving forward.
Yeah, but the interesting thing there, though, is when you think about companies like Microsoft, though, we don't take your individual data. It's more about, in the aggregate, all of it, all of it. And that's where you get the beauty of it, not just because we're not going to look that specifically at Karen, since Karen sits across the room, but we're looking at the data in full, and that's where you get the depth what you can glean, or the insights you can get, is because you're using all of it and not just a particular. I can see how that is on a consumer, but for big companies, it's really about all of that. You want all of the data, and you do get to, then you kind of do know what to share with people based on the fact that, you can see how it's moving around, but it is a big data thing, though.
So what this brings up to me then is that, at least in terms of a value or a policy, it's good to be inclusive and be good to, you'll get better products, better services, better outcomes if you can focus in on being inclusive with the data.
Exactly.
Uh-oh. Okay. We lost. Charlie, did you say something? We didn't hear you.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with Peter.
Oh, okay.
This is very key.
Absolutely.
Right. So in terms of other policy considerations, Kathy, you talked about early in the beginning about the fact that you had to have transparency, and I certainly could see that being important on the corporate end in terms of when you're offering products and services that use AI, as people try to understand those, what was the data that went in, what was the type of training and content that was put in the system so that it resulted in these particular outputs or types of actions. I would think as a value, it's good to be transparent. What, to your knowledge, is being done just in the area of transparency in terms of, I know it's nascent now, but in terms of just maybe your experience at Microsoft or just what you know in the industry in terms of what's happening in transparency?
Well, everybody, because of the transparency and what you have to go back and answer maybe for some governments around the world, some industries aren't now is happy, to be in a space where they do have to answer, certain questions like this in order to use more meaningful, deep AI. A lot of them are kind of stepping back from that right now. You look like you want to say something. No, but for Microsoft, we do one thing. That's a tenet we had. One for the cloud is that we operate in a transparent way. Right. Same thing goes for AI. And again, this is just a principle for us. I don't necessarily know if it's the principles, but you'll find that as you see policies and laws being developed around the world, there's probably going to be this mechanism. There's going to be this component to most laws that there has to be a way that we need to understand what did you do? What was your intent here? And is it doing that? And how did you get to how are you getting the answers and the outcomes that you're getting? You have to be able to explain that, particularly in places where, again, like Europe, that they believe, and, it's fair that their people, their data is their right. That is their fundamental right to their privacy and to what's theirs. And if you're using it, you need to tell me how, why, and how did I get denied, this loan? How did I get denied? So if it's a denial of service, a denial of freedom, you have a right to know how did the AI come up with this decision, which is another reason why we also believe there should be a human in the loop. There may be some technologies or some companies who believe, well, in certain instances you don't need a human in the loop, but we think AI is supposed to assist and enhance the human experience, eliminate some of the mundane, everyday, but not that it replaces the, humans in every step of the development and outcomes of AI. So,
One real-world example of the transparency that I'm sure everyone has seen is all of a sudden now every website you go to is telling you now that they're tracking your cookies and you have to accept it. Well, that's because law is passed requiring that they tell you that, right? That's a way of them being transparent now. Before they were tracking your cookies.
They've been doing it forever.
Now they're just telling you up front that we're tracking your cookies.
Right.
But
That's right.
I'm sure everyone's seen that.
That's right.
You on Facebook and you had just booked a flight somewhere else, and now Facebook is telling you about rental cars, and they're all doing,
Sure.
So there is a lot of information that they're collecting all the time, and
Sure.
But now you're right, they have to tell us.
Right. So as we move to the end here, and this has sort of been covered and certainly a theme in the discussion already, I think transparency and accountability go hand in hand. I like the concept of having a human involved. That also obviously helps for accountability. You talked about a governance structure within your company. I think internal review boards, whether it's in the companies or even in certain legislative bodies, may be something for the future. I'll end with this before we get to questions, that I think this last slide here does cover, I think, a good summary of some of the policy considerations that should be thought about overall. And this kind of encapsulates a lot of the most recent discussion we've had here.
Yeah.
So I'll conclude with that in terms of the presentation. We do have some time here for questions, and I've got one question already that I'll read and talk out loud for the sake of the group here. But we had a question within the IP area. And basically the question had to do with whether or not, or how is novelty dealt with in the open source environment. I think I'll send that one to Sean.
So I think we have to, without going too in-depth into the open source aspect of it, I think people have to understand what open source means. And so just at a high level, open source is more about the license and not necessarily about the code itself. So obviously if someone has published software that reads on a technology that you're developing, and they publish that open source software prior to you developing that technology, then certainly it's going to operate as prior art, and then your invention wouldn't be novel. But if you've developed it and patented it, the sheer fact that someone has published an implementation of that invention as open source does not take away from the novelty or the patent rights. And we can go further in depth of that in terms of, whether or not a patent is granted based off the different open source licenses you use. But in almost every case, and you have to look at the different open source licenses, you have to be a contributor to give a grant to your patent. So you can use open source software, have a patent on that open source software, and still not be subject to the open source software license, depending on the license. So it only affects novelty application if it came before your invention.
Do you think there's room, and this relates to another question we were asked, do you think there's room then for open source in AI?
So actually, there are tons of AI and open source groups in all manners of areas of the technology. One more prominent one is the car manufacturing companies are coming together, one, because it's simply cheaper if they all invest in developing the technology together, but two, if they can standardize the way that they collect the data, standardize the way that they use the data, then it's beneficial to everyone, right? And so you have Auto Linux being developed, and it's where these car manufacturers and their navigation, GPS, and infotainment centers are all using Linux, which is an open source software, as the foundation for that piece. And if you think about Android, right? So there are a lot of different cell phone manufacturers that use Android, but no two different manufacturers' Androids look exactly the same. And that's because they take that as the background and the foundation, and then they put their spin or their design element on top of it. And so the same is true with the car manufacturers. For example, BMW, Mercedes, and Toyota are all part of an autonomous vehicle standard organization, and they're also using open source. So just as artificial intelligence is everywhere, open source is everywhere. I mean, back in 2012, there was a study that 73% or more of all Fortune 500 companies were using open source, whether they knew it or not. And so that number has only grown since then.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? I could have one. I think we got one more question. Hold on. Okay, this is interesting. This is a question that encapsulates copyright. So, who would be liable or who would owe for use of the copyright in a machine-translated book?
That is an interesting question, and I think that touches on some of the same issues of who is liable for infringement with the patents. A definitive answer, we don't have one yet. And until the courts have actually weighed in on it, I'm not sure we will have one. I can certainly see arguments for both sides, where the literature that was later developed from the AI example or read out loud would be liable, and obviously then that would be the owner who put forth the copyrighted work for it to be able to infringe that copyright. But then you could also see how that could enable, down the line of simply just learning data, right? Like part of what AI does is gathering more information. So you would want them to have the knowledge of the different books to be able to create new works. And so I think some of the same analysis that applies today with humans will apply to the robot context. It just seems like, in my opinion, that more people will be liable as opposed to less people. I think they'll just go after everyone as opposed to trying to figure out who initially is the infringer.
Right. Last question, and this is a good one for argument's sake. What about the scenario where the creator of an AI system, that maybe that system or robot is inventing things itself, was initially programmed with some guidance or guideline that said do not infringe? It was given some set of criteria where it was defined by whoever gave the input, their understanding. Let's just say it was pretty reasonable, or some experts themselves, as to, use parts A, B, and C, but not part D, which is covered by the following patents. If someone had gone through that measure of sort of preparation with the input into the AI system, could they then, whether that system or the creator of the system, be liable for patent infringement in this sort of futuristic world?
So, considering that issue, I think on the one hand, you have a reasonable argument that you try to not infringe, but just today, just because you have a reasonable basis to believe you don't infringe, that doesn't protect you from infringement. So I would say you still infringe. But if you look at it from the other perspective and why you would want that to be the outcome, if that same robot invented something that not infringed but was patentable, you would want to own that patent and have the rights to it.
Sure.
Especially as a company investing the money into that technology, right? You wouldn't want it to be the robot that has the patent. And the reason that is in question is because the patent statute says a person is entitled to a patent. It says nothing about a machine or robot that's learning. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic of what is qualified as a person. We've seen that in the context of corporations over the years. Will we see that in the context of robots? I guess time will tell.
Oh, excellent discussion. That last question, to me, really encapsulates what happens all the time with law and technology, where law never catches up to where technology is going. That question there shows you that if it's defined as an invention by a person, we've got a problem in terms of trying to figure out some clarity on that statute and the legislation around it. So with that, we'll conclude. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to speaking with you again.